Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum. Today we are taking a look at a pair of fairly modern Japanese police revolvers. These are both Smith & Wessons. One of them is a Smith & Wesson Model 37-2, that came first, and following it, the Japanese procured Smith & Wesson Model 360Js, the J for Japan. Now, these continue a tradition of arming the police in Japan with what would be considered in the United States a terminally underpowered and inefficient weapon. Essentially a 5-shot air-weight J-frame Chief Special size of revolver. And the use of this sort of gun as a police armament dates back to right after World War II. So before World War II, the Japanese government was quite right-wing and quite activist when it came to putting down left-wing opponents, and there was a lot of sort of secret police activity. And the police were largely seen as an armed enforcement branch of the government. Well, after the war, the Allies, the United States, really wanted to prevent this sort of government from reemerging. They didn't, and between the US and the Japanese, there was a very deliberate effort to moderate the police, to civilianize the police. They're not going to be like a military branch acting as law enforcement. They're going to be a helpful community organization that will carry a gun because you might actually just have to use it at some point, but probably just by pulling it out and pointing it at someone. That's like, ideally, that's all the police will ever have to do with their guns. So they need something, but we don't want it to be intimidating. We don't want it to give the wrong impression of what the police are supposed to be. And so they're equipped with 38 special caliber revolvers. In this case, following World War II, it's the new Nambu Model 60. It's a revolver manufactured in Japan at the Chuyo Kogyo factory under new management. Chuyo Kogyo was originally set up by Kijiro Nambu, making military small arms, and they keep his name sort of as a branding thing. Nambu is the most notable of Japanese firearms designers, so this becomes the new Nambu revolver. And the company makes a couple other guns. They have a 9mm version of the 1911, they have a semi-auto 32 automatic, they have a 22 caliber target pistol, but it's their 38 special revolver that goes to the police. And like over 100,000 of these were eventually purchased and used by the Japanese National Police Force. It's a gun that's in between the Smith & Wesson J and K frames in size, 38 special, small gun. In the US, the police would be considered just hopelessly underarmed with this gun, but in Japan, it's all that's deemed necessary or even desirable. Like, the less the police can be armed with, the better. Now, this changes when we get to the 1990s in particular. By the 1990s, there's a view of, like, there's a lot more that the police might have to respond violently to. There's terrorism going on. There was, of course, the subway gas attack in, I believe it was in Tokyo. And there's a move among an element of the Japanese police to re-equip the force with a proper, real pistol, like a 9mm service automatic. Let's just get Glock 17s or Beretta 92s, that sort of thing. This results in a relatively contentious handgun adoption program that in 1995 picks the SIG P230 in 32 ACP, which is an intermediate choice. It's a compromise choice. It's a semi-automatic pistol, so that ought to make the modernists happy. They get an automatic pistol for the first time in basically Japanese police history. But it's also small and cute and not particularly dangerous looking. And so that ought to make the old school revolver traditionalists happy. Well, true to form, it makes nobody happy. It was in fact a proper compromise. Everybody's upset with it. And I have a separate video on the Japanese P230 adoption that I'll link in the description text below. So if you want to know more about this, check out that video. But in the aftermath of that adoption, nobody's really happy, and they keep buying revolvers. And specifically, they go to the United States. And in 2002, Japan Japan makes a large purchase of Smith & Wesson Model 37-2 revolvers. This is the air-weight version of the Chief Special. Frankly, it's actually an even tinier little revolver than the new Nambu Model 60. They will procure those until 2006, when the gun is dropped from Smith & Wesson's catalog, and at that point, the Japanese police replace it with the Smith & Wesson Model 360J. Once again, like a customized version specifically for the Japanese police. They did the same thing with the P230s, and they have some specific elements that they want in their revolvers, and they get those in the 360J. So let's take a closer look at both of these, and let me show you what makes the Japanese versions distinctive. This is our 37-2. It is chambered for 38 Smith & Wesson Special. This is the airweight version of the gun, so it's an aluminum alloy frame. The Smith & Wesson Model 36 is the Chief's Special. It's the same size, but with a steel frame. This is an aluminum alloy frame. It does have a steel barrel and a steel cylinder. We have serial number here. We also have a Japanese applied inventory number over on this side. Not sure how this gun came back into the US, but it appears to be one that actually went to Japan and then came back. If I open up the cylinder, it is a 5-shot cylinder, by the way, and then we have the serial number and the 37-2 marking, model designation, there inside the crane. This is a 1.8-inch barrel. It is absolutely about the tiniest revolver barrel you will ever get. Fixed sights, of course. Exposed spur hammer. This can be fired either in double action or in single action. My understanding is the Japanese police are trained to only shoot in single action. The reduced accuracy from the extra force required for a double action trigger pull is considered an unacceptable risk. What makes this probably most distinctive from a regular Smith & Wesson 37 is the inclusion of a hole in the frame and a lanyard loop. Now, these lanyard loops were actually installed in Japan by the, let's see if I can pronounce this right, Minabeya Omori factory. I think I got that right. So the guns came over to Japan, had the lanyard rings installed, and that is because the Japanese have placed a huge emphasis on security of the guns. So all of their handguns are going to come equipped with lanyards. So this end is secured to your duty belt or to your person. This end to the gun, it of course stretches so that you can actually draw and shoot the gun. If we take a closer look here, the lanyards they use, and this is an original actual Japanese issue lanyard, it's not just a spring clip here, it's actually a locking spring clip. So I can run that screw out and then open it up, hook it around the gun, and then I just tighten this screw back in until it locks there, at which point I can't open the clip. So the lanyard is nice and definitively attached until I unscrew that to take it off. Then if we go to the holster, in the holster, not only do we have a full flap, but we also have a retention strap. So the gun's going to go in the holster, and then the retention strap is going to lock the gun in place there so it can't come out, and then the flap is going to lock over the whole thing so that it really can't come out. And if it does manage to fall out from both of those, well, it's still strapped to the police officer. So this is, I think, gives you a really good idea of the priorities of the Japanese National Police when it comes to just a standard beat cops service weapon. It's way more important to make sure that nothing accidental happens than to have an effective, capable firearm in case it's actually needed. As best I can tell, Japan acquired 10,863 of these, delivered between 2003 and 2005. And it appears that Smith & Wesson actually overproduced them a bit because there are overruns that were available on the US civilian market. So you can find 37-2s with all of these features except for the lanyard rings, which were, as I said, added in Japan. So when the 37-2 is no longer available, the Japanese transition over to what appears to be essentially the exact same gun. They go for the Model 360 PD, except they want it modified to their a few of their specifications. So the 360 is another, it's a scandium alloy frame that has a titanium cylinder and a stainless steel barrel sleeve inside an alloy barrel shroud. And it is like ludicrously light. It's like 11 point something ounces in the US, and it's chambered for 357 Magnum thanks to the titanium cylinder. Well, the Japanese don't want 357, they only want it in 38 Special, and In 38 Special, it doesn't need a titanium cylinder, so they opt for, or request and get, a stainless or a steel cylinder. So these are chambered for 38 Special plus P. You get the plus P because, I mean, it's pretty darn close to being capable of firing 357 anyway. And interestingly, this is air weight again. Interestingly, on the American versions of the Model 360, the logo here is actually like a big nuclear atom logo to get across the point of it being a scandium, you know, super fancy exotic material frame. Well, they decided a nuclear looking logo was not culturally sensitive for Japan, and so they replaced it with a big Smith & Wesson logo instead. So that's what you'll find on the 360J models. Again, this is a pattern that did see some commercial contract overrun, and you can buy 360Js in the United States. I don't think you can buy them new at this point, but there have been one or two batches that were released onto the US market. There is a key lock in here, which a lot of American gun owners absolutely detest, but I think you already get the idea that an added safety device is not going to offend the Japanese police. So they left those in. This is still a 5-shot gun. Again, we have the model designation M360J and the serial number on the inside of the frame. Same barrel length, basically the same overall weight. When you go to the steel cylinder instead of titanium and you add on the grip, which we'll get to in a moment, you have a weight of about, I think it's 14.7 ounces, so just a little under a pound. It's still a ludicrously lightweight piece of equipment to carry. Now, this grip is kind of like the lanyard loops that were added to the 37s. These grips and their lanyard loops were added, again, at the Minabeya Omori, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, factory in Japan after the guns were imported, and they specifically went for a 3-finger grip. So you just have this extra finger groove, finger support hanging off, which does, in fact, give this a much better feel for handling than the 2-finger grip of the Model 37s. And since this is being carried out, you know, on the duty belt in a triple secure holster, the extra length here doesn't matter. If this was being carried as a backup gun or an ankle gun or a pocket gun, that extra finger groove would be a problem, but not for the Japanese. Now, I should point out where the owner of this gun tells me that unable to find an original Japanese police issue grip. This grip and lanyard are actually from a Tanaka reproduction gun. Tanaka makes airsoft and repro guns in Japan, and so he got the appropriate 360J grip from them and installed it here on this particular gun. Still double action, single action, still typically used only in single action. When used at all, I should say typically not used, and when used in single action. I should also point out that from 2009 to 2011, there were some issues with frames cracking in the 360s. It appears to have ultimately been like less than 1% of pistols. They had something like 200 examples that were cracked out of, as of 2011, some 25,000 of these revolvers that had been purchased. So that problem seems to have been fixed. They resolved it in 2011. I don't have any good data on how many of these were purchased afterwards, but it is many tens of thousands of these 360Js in Japanese service. We actually have a couple different styles of police holster here. So this is one that just goes directly on the belt with a safety strap and a full flap. This is a model for a slightly longer pistol. Not sure exactly what model of revolver this would be for. This might fit the Nambu 60, which is a little bit longer, but internal construction wise, it's exactly the same. Retention strap, full flap. And then you have another pattern here, which is kind of cool, set up with a drop leg locking system. So this goes on your belt, and you have a metal locking ring and a lug here. This is spring-loaded, and these are like brand new and unused, so I don't want to mess with it. But this locks in there, and then that snap attaches right there to make sure that nothing can fall off. And then, of course, you have the predictable retention strap and full flap. with all this discussion of the Japanese National Police being armed with what would be considered a backup ankle carry gun in most other places, I should point out that there are absolutely more heavily armed elements of the Japanese police that are specifically trained and equipped as essentially emergency reaction forces, the SWAT teams, more or less. And they have a variety of proper modern 9mm service pistols, as well as carbine submachine guns, that sort of thing. But the beat cop in Japan still is seen as very much removed from a firearm and the use of physical force. And so it's revolvers like these that are still in very widespread use in Japan by the police forces today. I'd like to give a big thanks to the viewer who loaned me these guns and their holsters to show to you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.